What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. We're going to bounce around some NBA playoffs talk. If you have questions and you're in here, feel free to ask them. We'll throw them up in the chat, or I'll answer them in the chat, even if I don't throw them up in the chat. Aside from that, we have to ask the most important question, the one that everyone cares about most, or at least I definitely care about most. Grant, how the heck are you doing?
You definitely care about this more than maybe anybody else in my life, because you ask me how I'm doing all the time. I'm doing really well. As we discussed, I'm always happy when some series end in the first round, because the first round is the hardest part of my year, because there's just too many important things to be paying attention to. And so anytime we can trim some of those things off, I'm always a happy guy. So that might seem counterintuitive because it means less basketball, but we've had a lot of basketball for a long time, and I'm ready to focus in on fewer things and hopefully do deeper dives and that kind of thing as we get fewer and fewer teams. So I'm doing well. How are you doing? Do you feel the same way about the first round?
Yeah, there are times of year where I think the nature of our job, by the way, is just a dead sprint, like the entire, when you're covering it, but it's just a dead sprint right now, to where you look up and it's like, oh, 2.5 weeks have passed, it feels like, or whatever it is. We're heading into the third playoff weekend already, and I just feel like I haven't had time to come up for air. So I do appreciate being like munch on these series a little bit more, because you're not just jumping from game to game on the same day. And so it allows for more critical thought. But then even that, it's like you have to start getting an off-season prep. And then I feel like when there's fewer series, even more stuff is nitpicked about nationally. And some of it's just like, that becomes exhausting. So,
I want to ask you a follow-up question that I don't think I prepared you for, but this will be interesting anyway. Have you seen the comments? I know the guy's whole job is to say things that make us annoyed and talk about the topic, hopefully like in emotional terms. But did you see Stephen A. Smith talking about how Kawhi Leonard the Clippers should force him to retire or ask him to retire? And first of all, did you see that, or am I the first person that's telling this to you?
I didn't watch the clip. I saw the pull quote, and so like I'm hoping it wasn't as like egregious as it sounds, because that's when you talk about toxic or disingenuous coverage, or talking points, that's it. It's not one of the best beat writers in the business asking Giannis if the number 1 seed failing to make it out of the first round against the number 8 seed that had to come in, or the team that had to come out of the play-in, is a failure. And I don't know if am I brave for doing this? Who's to say? But I don't know if you saw my thread where I shit all over Mark Cuban because of the way he was like, I wonder basically how artificial it was. He pays for Twitter Blue, so he had like a long ass thing. I did read it all, but basically how artificial intelligence might make the sports media industry better because of these like lazy questions, essentially. And I'm like, first of all, he follows me on Twitter. I do not follow him, but he follows. I don't know why. By the way, I must have written something nice about him or the Mavs once. And so am I brave for posting this? Who's to say, really? But I think that, yeah. But no, in all seriousness, I said, one, spare me the sports media sermon from the guy who made Bleacher Report way back when, cried to Ted Turner and had them take down a Dirk Forever tweet. Fucking petty ass billionaire shit. Like, spare me that, please. And the other thing is, it's a completely fair question, to where I don't want to deviate from your topic. The actual unfair talking points is demanding that Kawhi Leonard retire, because he clearly has like degenerative knees at this point. These are chronic.
It's not like he didn't try. I mean, like, it's this puts to bed if anything, the Clippers were like not conservative enough in load management, is what this says to me. And so I think, yeah, I'll let you continue, but I'm really glad you brought up the Giannis clip, because I want to talk about that too. But yeah, sorry, continue about the Kawhi Cuban thing.
Yeah, it's I just know I don't know what your thoughts are. I know I can guess what your thoughts on it are, but like, it's completely unfair. And and I want to get into like what the Clippers can and can't do this offseason, which is, spoiler alert, they can't do a whole lot because of the new CBA. I don't know if you saw the other thing, by the way. So we know the second apron stuff, where you can't spend your mid-level exception, you can't add salary via trades. John Hollinger reported this a couple days ago, I think, and I missed it. You can't like aggregate to cut salary. So like, you can't say, hey, here are two $30 million players for two $20 million, like combined $20 million players. And I'm like, what I can't believe the players union agreed to this, because they've functionally instituted a hard cap,
right?
Almost. And so, but the Kawhi stuff, I don't know what to make of it, because I feel really bad. And he was so good, and he was playing at least one game probably on a torn meniscus, maybe two. And to be that good still, I want to see him healthy when it matters most. I don't, can you ever count on that now? And I don't, the answer is not blowing it up. And I think the Clippers came out and said they weren't going to do that, because what are you getting for Kawhi and PG with all this time they've missed? They both could technically become free agents after next season. It's like, I don't even know what the market would look like. And you don't control your own draft until 2027. So you need Kawhi to be healthy. And I know you said maybe they didn't load manage him effectively enough. I don't know who posted this thread on Twitter, and I think it was a doctor of like physiology. They talked about how load management isn't necessarily about rest. It's about recovery more. And I'm starting to wonder, like, are they doing him a disservice by not playing him more? But then I'm like, he just sat out back-to-backs after December. It's not like they did anything crazy. And so unless there's something like absolutely ridiculous on the, like that he's not recovering or not participating in any practices or stretching. So I don't know what the answer is here, but it's not, you don't get to force a player to retire. Like if there's actually a career threatening injury, and there's clearly chronic shit going on, but if it's a career threatening injury, like what's happening with Lonzo Ball, we haven't necessarily had that with Kawhi Leonard yet, as serious as his injuries have been.
Yeah, it's just it's an unserious thing to say from a person whose job it is to be pretty unserious, or at least whose principal job is not to be serious, in his opinion. The Giannis thing, everybody's probably seen this by now, is just the question from Eric Name of The Athletic: was this season a failure? And like, I'm blown away by the perception that Giannis was like angry at him, or like, oh, this reporter got, Giannis ethered him. It's like, no, that was like a real, and Sam Amick wrote about this a little bit today and kind of in response to the Cuban side of things. But that was a real, like, sincere, before we get even to the content of what Giannis said, or the fact that he had, like, can you imagine being in that position and having I don't know what, patience, just like good-heartedness and perspective and thoughtfulness to give that answer, like at that time. Like, that's insane to me. One, two, this was not a Giannis clapping back or like shutting down the reporter. This was like, those two know each other. They have a real relationship built over years. And Giannis was like,
first name in the answer.
Right. Use his first name. Looked him in the eye the whole time. This was like an engaging, like, granted, like intense, emotional, from Giannis's side anyway, like conversation with a difficult question that was not only fair to ask, but like, great question. Like, it's not meant to be incendiary. And if the goal of a good question is to provoke an interesting response, like, mission accomplished a billion times over. Because the Giannis's soundbite, to me, and to call it a soundbite does it a huge disservice, because it was just like, it was such a thoughtful way to answer a question that you could have tossed off. And he has tossed off in the past, and guys in that position always generally toss it off. But I don't know, maybe. So anyway, to the content of it, like, that hit me in such a real way. And it was so, like, refreshing is a word that's been used, but so sincere and so interesting. And I think it's just because it felt like he 100% meant it. And granted, there's some self-serving factor to it, because like, he was asked if his team failed, and by many accounts and by many people's view of it, like, they did. You lost to the 8th seed pretty handily. You performed really poorly. We can talk about, like, do we credit the Heat or blame the Bucks more later, and why do we think about things that way? But I just thought the idea of no, like, the success is in the work, basically, was like, if you really had to distill it down, was like, it just hit me in like a real place. Cause you know what? Like, we're all just out here trying, like, we're all doing our best. And if you're focused on the result, you're missing the value of the process. And like, their whole time on this planet is all just about the process. Like, how are you handling what you're tasked with doing, like, right now, from moment to moment? And to have him put that kind of perspective on it in a position where nobody does that was just like, yeah, man, preach. Just please put this like on a plaque somewhere and go tell your kids, like, this is how sports is supposed to make you think. This is how you should approach life. Like, it just perfectly, and maybe you disagree. And I respect people that are like, no, this is a results oriented business. The point is to win, and you didn't win, therefore failure. The way that it resonated with me was like, that's the way we ought to be thinking about not just a 1-8 upset, not just, the fact that 29 teams don't win the championship every year. They don't all fail, but just like the whole way we go about like our day-to-day life and our year-to-year, like how do we measure success? I just like, it was perfect. It rang 100% true to me. And I wish that more people would have like that approach to it and be able to articulate it as well as Giannis could in his second effing language. Like I couldn't be that concise and clear and thoughtful in English. If you just listen to me blabber for like the last 3 minutes, proof I can't do it. Just amazing by him. I loved it. Favorite part of the playoffs. Sorry, Jimmy Butler.
I agree with everything you said, with the caveat that I also think Giannis was wrong, because it's fine to view it that way, but this wasn't Eric Name asking the question after you had just lost in the finals. You were the title favorite. And yes, sure, Giannis had the back injury that cost him 2+ games. It's clear he wasn't right afterwards. Maybe you can take issue with how succinct the question was phrased. But again, they have a working relationship. Giannis knows what Eric is referring to. In sports, it's very different than in these jobs that you and I. What is our end game by doing the jobs that we have? Basically, put food on the table, keep a roof over our heads. And Giannis has faced very real adversity. This is not like diminishing that at all. In sports, there's more of a tangible end game. In the positions that we're in, it's more like, it's not, the word's not even abstract. There's not necessarily clear paths forward. There's not a clear next thing. Winning the title in the NBA as a professional basketball player, like that is the ultimate goal. Now, there are only a handful of teams that are capable of winning it each year. The Bucks were one of them. And I think they're also reaching an inflection point. And I think this gets into, we want to talk about the actual Clippers and Bucks offseasons a little bit. They are reaching an inflection point because Brook Lopez is a free agent. Chris Middleton has a player option. They are going to be hamstrung by these new CBA rules. I would imagine that they would be far enough above the apron to where they won't have their mini MLE. They won't be able to make trades as easily. Yep. They don't have a ton of draft picks. So I think it was absolutely a fair question. And to say, no, do you think that if you don't want to use the word failure, is the season disappointing? Is the end to your season? Not is the season, maybe is the entire season a failure? You know what? No, you finished with the best record in the league. We want the regular season to matter. Was your postseason a failure? Part of your charm, part of your appeal was that you were supposed to be able to navigate either a limited Giannis or just beat this Heat team with how they played in the regular season without him. Now, Miami went supernova like from the perimeter, which is just not something they were doing from three during the regular season. Duncan Robinson comes in, makes an impact. They're starting Kevin Love and shit. Gabe Vincent, I aspire to have his confidence when he's looking off Jimmy Butler in crunch time and taking jumpers early in the shot clock. But the postseason ending was a failure for this team. That doesn't make the Bucks, like this Bucks era with Giannis, a failure. It doesn't make this organizational failure for the entire year. But there's a clear, comparing it to, can you, as a sports writer, you didn't get a promotion. There's not a clear next step in most people's data. There's not as much upward mobility or defined goals. And so I thought he was entitled to feel how he feels. Like you said, I thought it was incredibly well articulated and argued. And I don't necessarily think he missed the mark so much as I do not totally agree with him.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, because just on its face, if we're critiquing like the argument, he does sort of make like a false equivalency, or just at least a poor comparison, because it isn't like there's a championship for beat writers, and if you don't get it and that's what you're going for, and you maybe should have gotten it, or were among the favorites and you fell way short of it, that's not like that's not a true one-to-one thing. I just think that if you look at it from the perspective, so point taken, I think that's a fair way to parse it. And maybe my issue with it is like, if the question had been, well, you wouldn't even ask this. Like, was this season a disappointment? Like, of course, like he doesn't give that answer. If the question is, was it a disappointment? Because he's, one, visibly disappointed, and two, all of the other factors that you've mentioned and we've talked about, like 1-8, the way they went out, the way the Bucks just failed. And I said it, just came up short in so many instances, like tactically, Giannis's free throws, all this other stuff. But I wonder if what you're measuring is, did you meet the potential that many people thought you had? I guess you could say that's a failure. But I would argue then, like, I guess to me, I'm internalizing this a lot. I think as I think about it more, to me, I do think the right way to operate in almost anything, and this is an extreme case that kind of stretches the bounds of this feeling, is to focus on, did you work as hard as you possibly could have? Like, did you give maximum focus, maximum effort? Was your process as good as it could have been? And I think for Giannis specifically, I think he's kind of unassailable in that regard, because I think he's about the right things. He's obsessed as a worker. Like, he just has limitations. Like the free throw thing, 10 of 23. If he makes 15 of 23, which is still shitty for a professional basketball player, the Bucks just win that game, and we're not having any of these conversations. Maybe they go on to win the series. There's certain limitations that he has. I think in terms of what he was capable of controlling throughout the year and throughout his career, like, he's just maxed it out. Like, he's just done as much as you could do. And to me, that feels successful as opposed to calling it a failure. So yeah, I don't know. You have made me think about it a little differently, because the NBA is like a zero-sum game. Somebody wins and everybody else loses. Only one person succeeds, or one team succeeds technically. But I'm beating the same drum. I love the framing of it that way. It resonates with me in like a real way.
There's an authenticity to this discussion that we can't have about what Stephen A said about Kawhi.
Right.
And that's what the difference here is. Mm-hmm. And you know what? AI isn't going to replace the talking heads on TV, as far as I know. Like, I'm not, like the most technologically savvy person, but are we going to have like holograms on there, like making these takes? So the Bucks offseason, though, is going to be fascinating. Budenholzer is already seems like he's on the hot seat, but Jake Fisher, Yahoo Sports, just came out and reported and said that wasn't really internally. The Bucks made mistakes, and I don't really mind that end of regulation, no timeout. Like, look at how like much time was left. Like, I don't know what you were gonna do there. It's more the fact that
I got a problem with that one.
Well, there are real issues to be taken. I don't want to belabor like what already happened, but like, I don't know that who is available. Like, are you that like you want Nick Nurse with this roster? I don't think firing Budenholzer is the answer. I think that's the move. And I'm not defending Budenholzer, so as it feels like it would be more lateral if you're not going to figure out a way to make changes to the roster. And so do you go that route? And I just, I honestly, I wouldn't at this point, just because I don't know what who the candidates are that they would want to replace him. And I think the other thing here is just there's material flaws with this roster that I don't think were highlighted enough. It's just they have all these different wings. Jay Crowder maybe should have played more, but it's like, it's Jay Crowder. It's age 88 Joe Ingles. Chris Middleton was definitely not the same defensively, at least coming back from his injury. And you have Brook Lopez going into free agency. And I think he would have, if I'm Oklahoma City, I'm like, what's it going to take to get you here for 2 years? We'll give you all the money to play next to Chet Holmgren. I don't think he leaves, but you can run it back and I guess still be fine. I just don't know how they make material changes to the roster. I think they could probably use, again, some extra like wing type depth, and then I think they're going to need like, I don't even know what the answer is. Like, I don't want to phrase it this way, but someone other than Drew Holiday, who's going to get primary assignments against like the other team's best player. And that's not easy things to get. They can trade a 2029 first round pick, and then they have some salary matching tools to use. I don't know what, and they could win the title next year as currently constructed. That wouldn't shock me because Giannis is that great. Maybe he, plays better from mid range or shoots better from free throws in the postseason next year, or is just healthier in the postseason. But I just don't know what the path forward is for this team, given the circumstances under which they lost, and then now the strictures in which they're working inside this new CBA.
Yeah, I think a couple things. The idea of firing Budenholzer simultaneously feels like the easy answer and the wrong answer. And that's just because, as you alluded to, there aren't good options. It's fix the roster or change the coach. And neither of those, certainly fixing the roster is just insanely complicated because they don't have the resources. The Bucks don't have ways to go get the types of players that they need to really change the way they play, or at least increase the options they have to give Budenholzer more options to tweak things or give different looks. It's just, it's just not gonna. You can't really do it. You have to bring Lopez back because you can't replace him. You have to probably just I don't know what you hope with Middleton. I think what you hope is that he opts out. You bring him back at a lower number for more years, and somebody doesn't just come in and beat you, with a bigger offer. Which
he's
seems
already
like
been linked to Houston, by the way, by Jake Fisher, and they have. If there's a team that's going to be like, oh, they gave a lot of money to Chris Middleton, it's probably the Rockets.
Houston's going to mess somebody up because it does seem like they're, or maybe help somebody in the event that they just overpay Harden to leave the Sixers. But so there is no easy way to fix this. The Holiday thing, I'm glad you mentioned that because there was another sort of weird, incongruous set of arguments that have been being made about this, which is, you're not wrong because the results are what they are. They really should have tried somebody other than Holiday on Jimmy Butler because it clearly was not working, right? Like, I don't think you get to say that and then also spend the last 10 years acknowledging that every player in the league is like, this guy is as good as it gets defensively. And putting him on all defensive teams, no questions asked. I don't think there's a scenario where if you're Budenholzer, for example, and that's one of the nits you want to pick, you should have tried somebody else, for earlier or for longer stretches on Butler. Like, I just don't think that's a realistic thing to ask because the alternative had let's Wes Matthews, you got him for the whole series. Like everybody would have been like, this man is out of his mind. He has Drew Holiday on his team. Every year, the players all agree Drew Holiday is the best defensive player, certainly best defensive guard in the league. Like that's not a realistic scenario. But that's where we are though. And that's emblematic of the Bucks kind of predicament going into the offseason is, do you what change is there? What player is out there that you could realistically get that is going to definitely improve your chances of a better result next year? To me, I totally agree with you. The best case for this team is they bring basically everyone back and hope Giannis improves from the foul line and makes a jumper once in a while and just they get better that way because there's just not a guy or guys out there that they can get that's going to change anything that has a better chance of changing something than staying the same. I know it's a cop out and I know I tend to skew towards like conservatism and building rosters and trades and other stuff, but like find me the proof that there's a guy that they can go get that's going to change something. I don't see it.
I don't even know if something like this works under like the salary cap, like because they have to basically take in dollar for dollar at this point, depending on how much Lopez and Middleton making. And maybe Middleton not making 40 million, like if he's on the books for 30, like 4 and 120, like that could help get some flexibility. But like your best offer is Marjon Beauchamp, 1 first-round pick, salary filler. Like that's the offer you go and dangle. And I don't know, I guess you can include swaps because 2030 picks will be opened up at this point, but that's technically not because the 7-year picks go away if you're over a certain amount. Like you can't trade that one. So you might be limited to the 1 first-round pick, Beauchamp, and salary. That's not getting you, and I don't even know if this is what they need, but like that's not getting you OG. It's definitely not getting you Mikal Bridges. I don't even know who the best player realistically that offer could get you. I don't mean that in like is that like the Hawks aren't going to, after some of the moments he had in the playoffs, the Hawks aren't going to just unload DeAndre Hunter for that. And so I'm not at a loss. We know what they need. I just don't know how they go about doing it. And I also think, and this is a good segue into the Clippers, because it's so fresh, I do think there's a tendency to over sensationalize how poorly off some of these teams are. Right. And the Bucks, they're so inflexible and asset light, but they still have Giannis. His shot making gets weird in the playoffs, but he hit like that corner step back. And it just reminds you like he's this absurd shot maker. And even if he's not going to remain that way through, this most important 16 games of the season, he'll help you navigate the regular season for sure. Middleton is he's still really good on offense if he's going to be able to stay healthy, and he'll have an entire offseason now that began earlier than anyone expected. This team is still okay, but like you do start to look at like Brook Lopez being 35 is wild. Yeah. He just had the best season of his career. So I don't know if you have anything to add on them. They might be able to make a smaller move and just be fine. Like if it's just, do they get someone else it's either, look, again, it's wings or it's just someone who in theory is like, oh, you can play him like a Jay Crowder, but he doesn't hurt your offense. We don't necessarily know if that is Jay Crowder because he didn't play enough. They could make a level of that move or a level of that signing. Maybe they get lucky or smart or unearth a bargain in free agency. The Clippers, I don't know what they do, because how do you build? They're talking about bringing Russell Westbrook back. Ty Lue said he expects to be the coach of this roster. I don't fully buy that, by the way. The Clippers are the job I'm watching. Something seems off there. He just gets married to these certain players, forgets about others. Something as creative as people are, or as much as people celebrate the creativity of Ty Lue, and I think he's a fantastic coach, I don't know if he's the best manager of talent at this point. Not Doc Rivers level, like I'm encouraging conflict in the locker room, but something just seems like, why is Robert Covington collecting dust and rust at this point? So I'm watching that job, but other than making a coaching change, and I don't think that bringing in Nick Nurse or bringing in Charles Lee or bringing in Sam Quinn or Kenny Atkinson is going to make this team materially better. What makes them materially better is there a pivot that's realistic, or an upgrade that's realistic, or do Kawhi and PG just stay healthy enough when it matters most? And quite frankly, this is year 4 of this experiment wrapped up. We know what the Clippers can be at full strength. The assumption cannot be that they will ever be at full strength anymore. Right. We're past it.
Yeah, no, you can't assume that. The Clippers are a really interesting foil for the Bucks, because it's sort of like, in a way, the Bucks loss feels more significant, because Giannis did miss a bunch of time with the back injury, and Middleton, fought through injury, and was actually pretty good, I thought, in the series relative to like maybe what expectations should have been. And so they were sort of more whole, and they've all actually, I think it also probably hurts the Bucks that they actually have won a title. And so there was that understanding that like, that's the level now that we've seen you hit, keep hitting it. The Clippers are for the 4th year in a row. And I think I talked about this last time, now that I think of it, they continue to be a team stuck in, well, if everyone's healthy, then we can just put them on the short list of contenders with a giant asterisk next to them, which is, to your point, that they can't ever be healthy. That's just not something we get to have. I would say that they probably have more avenues to altering this roster, just because they're going into the summer with like a bunch of expiring mid-tier deals that they can move. That and you still have the market's just better. Like, I think that just is worth X% edge in whatever transaction you're talking about, because you're in LA. And players do seem to like Ty Lue. I think that's a factor. I don't know how players generally feel about Budenholzer, but if it's Milwaukee versus LA, sorry, LA just always wins. Right. So I think they're better positioned, but they also might just be drawing dead, because unlike the Bucks, we haven't seen a version of this team that, that you say, well, that's it. That's the peak version. We've seen that play. It's just, we haven't seen it yet, and we can't expect it. So I think there are more options, but the floor is just Kawhi and Paul George are never healthy, and this team's cap is a first round out, like just full stop, right? So do you feel the same way? I mean, like, it's not a floor ceiling argument necessarily, but I feel like the Bucks have slightly less maneuverability than the Clippers do. Which isn't to say the Clippers have a lot, but I just think comparatively the Clippers have a little more.
Yeah, I mean, like, if they wanted to, and I would be an advocate of this, I think they have more salary matching fodder. That certainly helps. And then just like the Bucks don't have a Terrence Mann on their roster, right, if they want to include as whatever. But what I struggle with, I have such a poor feel for this team, and I feel like I just need to get better at admitting when I just don't have a great grasp of what they are, because it was so stop and start this year, even with Kawhi playing like a top 5 player for most of the season. And for all the belaboring over, oh, they need a floor general in there, and is Russ the answer? Russ outperformed my expectations. I don't know if he defends like that, if he's playing anyone other than Kevin Durant on the other team. That's who's to say. But it's like their defense was like, and they didn't have Paul George. They were missing Kawhi Leonard. What is like the actual single biggest need? Because they could, I think, look, their picks might be, they can, they was about to say they could trade 2 first-round picks now, but under the current rules, they can't anymore. They can trade a first-round pick. They have better contracts. It's just like, if you're casting your net, because you're improving this team now via trade, just because you can't even count on using your mini MLE, and who knows who the hell that gets you. Are you targeting someone who offsets as a creator the time that you expect Kawhi and PG to miss? Or are you maybe diversifying your front court rotation, where if Miles Turner becomes available, do you actually have a competitive offer for Miles Turner? And, oh, by the way, there are so few Miles Turners out there. I would argue like maybe like 3 guys that fit as a non-star in that, or maybe you consider him a star or whatever, you already have a Ivica Zubac on the roster. Like, you don't need to necessarily, in theory, go upgrade your center spot. It's only if you're that concerned about the defense surviving when there's only one or none of Kawhi and Paul George on the floor. I don't even know. Yes, I could think of targets that would make all the sense in the world, but realistic targets for them with the assets they have, that's what I really struggle with.
I think adding on to that is that, so say you go, I think I would agree with you that what they needed all year was they need a point guard that could do something better than John Wall could do it, and better than we certainly thought Russell Westbrook could do it. I think it's a little scary that it feels like they kind of need Westbrook going forward. But the idea is this applied to the Lakers when they traded for Russell Westbrook. He's an innings eater. He's going to make it so that our big guns don't have to do all the work during the year. He'll preserve guys. The problem with that logic always was that when you got to the playoffs and played the games that mattered, those guys were going to have to fill that role anyway. So you're going to have to completely change how you play and marginalize this guy who is going to eat innings or whatever, lighten the load for you. And so if you go out and get a point guard that is going to take the stress off of Kawhi and George during the year, you're not going to keep that style in the playoff games that the Clippers want to win, because obviously the only way the Clippers win a title or advance farther than they have been advancing is for Kawhi Leonard to be God for a full several series, and just he runs everything. And so this game manager, this like innings eater point guard that you have doesn't matter anymore, or certainly matters way, 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 way less. So it's like, are you trying to build a regular season roster? Are you trying to build a postseason roster? If anything, if we've learned anything from these playoffs that have been upside down and backwards and just unpredictable in so many different ways, it's still that the playoffs are way different. Like you need a different theory of how you're going to play in the playoffs than you do in the regular season. That's just, the Heat are just like we're going to just like bronze them and put them in, in a glass case somewhere as example 1A of why this is the case. So like, yeah, I agree. So you could flip a couple wings for I don't know who are you looking for in the trade market, or like, you're not going to go sign D'Angelo Russell. You're not going to, that's not going to happen. So yeah, I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Their move is maybe adding Bismack Biyombo in free agency. And I would love that move. I actually think he's a really good player for the roster, but that's like the ceiling on your free agency flexibility. And you would have to weigh that against, okay, that can't be the move, but on the flip side, who can we actually trade for? And so is it just a matter of maybe we catch lightning in a bottle and Paul George and Kawhi are just, we're due for them to be healthy at the same time in the playoffs?
Yeah, they're kind of stuck too. What would they have to do that would make you say, going into a playoff series next year, I don't think Kawhi is going to do the majority of the shot creation for us. Like, that's not going to happen. So, they can tinker on the edges, but there's nothing.
Do you know how you do that? You trade Kawhi or you trade Paul George to bring in the guy that does that.
And are they going to do that, do you think? What are the percentage chances that they trade even one of those guys? Is it like less than 10, right?
Yeah. Oh, I would say I just have it like it's non-zero, but
you know what? It's more likely they trade both than one. I would.
Yeah, because you're at that point you're straddling like sort of a weird line at this point. So, and I just don't know how you, especially if you're interested in bringing back Russell Westbrook, I think you've then decided, okay, between they do still have Bones Highland on this roster. You don't necessarily, like, I don't think floor generalship or captaincy becomes your biggest priority, even though maybe that's an imperfect cast. I just don't like, what team even want, like, could you, in theory, let's look at it this way. Could you build something around Norman Powell to get CJ McCollum from New Orleans? Like, who needs to send out? I don't think New Orleans isn't sending out picks. So let me make that clear. But like Norm Powell's deal, just because he is reserve and he's dealt with his own injury and he's not a shot, he gets downhill and hits threes, which, by the way, New Orleans, I think, needs more than what CJ McCollum brings, even though we haven't, because they have Ingram. In theory, they have Zion. But anyway, like, who needs to send out other stuff in that deal? I think it's LA. But like,
maybe, but I think the Pelicans might be pretty happy to get off that money, like that's a factor too. And I had never once thought of that trade before, but just my gut reaction is if the Pelicans are another example of a team that's sort of hamstrung because you can't really do anything significant that will give you a better chance to win than the Zion is healthy at the point and you surround him with shooters theory. So, anyway, so if you add Powell to that and take McCollum out of it because you don't need a quote unquote primary ball handler because it's going to be Zion, like that makes a lot of sense, especially with the money aspect of it. So I think maybe does New Orleans have to attach a pick to CJ McCollum? Are we there? Is that a real thing?
I was thinking more along the lines of like Norm Powell, Rocco, and maybe LA has to give up the just.
I don't know.
I guess McCollum doesn't provide. Now you're going to sacrifice rim pressure in Norm Powell for the shot creation of CJ McCollum. But like, is it like now you're really veering far into we don't expect both Kawhi and Paul George to be available when it matters most. I hadn't thought about that trade a lot, but I did just think of it. And I am very proud of myself for coming up with that on the fly. But I will say the other thing to wrap up on the Clippers, just because in theory, his money is so big that if you match it dollar for dollar, or you can get cheaper by trading one player for one player, do you just guarantee, if you really don't give a fuck and you know you're not going to be able to spend in free agency, do you guarantee Eric Gordon's contract and try and use that as like this massive, I know you have others in Marcus Morris, but like just to open up the number of avenues that you have, or no, you're just like, maybe we could get him back at the minimum.
No, I think it's the preservation of the salary slot, like way of thinking is persuasive to me a lot of the time. Like I think it sounds crazy, but if you're the Clippers and you don't care about money, I think you probably want that. You want a $20 million player that you can trade. I think maybe that's still valuable to them. Got a couple comments. You want to get us to those?
Yeah. All right. So FK Retro, PG to the Rockets for Jalen Green. I'd take it. And FK Retro also says Ob's more involved. So, I mean, is there? I mean, like, Paul George has 1 year
to make the money work.
Yeah. If I think the Rockets make that deal, if James Harden, or maybe maybe another wing player, they're trading for Jaylen Brown as well, or if they have another star coming. But the Clippers is just, you have to want to rebuild at that point. And so it's like, if you're going to trade Paul George, you might as well trade Kawhi. That's why I could come up with Paul George. I actually did. It was in the mailbag. There are fun destinations. I'd love to see him on the Knicks. Would be hella fun. Atlanta, I think, still has a bunch of chips to play. I had New Orleans on that list. There are other teams that I found, Miami, of course. But yeah, that's just, I think we're done on the Clippers. Before we get into the playoff series that are to come, I did want to ask you if you have any overarching thoughts about the Cavaliers. And they fall to the Knicks in 5 games. The discourse on them turned pretty quickly, I would say. And JB Bickerstaff, I think rightfully so. Mike Savagno on Twitter pointed this out, and he does a lot of good fantasy stuff, but he's great at covering the Cavs. He just got away from what was their most used lineup during the regular season and one of their most effective, with Isaac Okoro plus your 4 studs. And I think Bickerstaff deserves criticism for a lot of the rotations he ran. Did he stick with Danny Green at points too long? For the way that they approached Jalen Brunson defensively. But at the same time, I actually think the Okoro hesitancy says more about his offensive viability than anything else. We talked about on this podcast how he was hitting threes in the regular season, and maybe his injury had fucked things up leading into the postseason. It's different in the playoffs. It just is. We saw the Knicks were just leaving him. They didn't give a fuck. It made defending the Cavs offense even easier. And when Evan Mobley's shooting like 1 of 80 outside the restricted area, and Donovan Mitchell doesn't have it going, Darius Garland doesn't necessarily have it going, it makes it tougher. And so I had Jamie Bickerstaff, I think, 2nd or 3rd on my coach of the year ballot. I'm not saying he's inoculated against criticism. And as Mike Savagno did point out, there's value in making the decision, quote unquote, too soon than waiting too long. Donovan Mitchell, there is a sense of urgency here. Donovan Mitchell's 2 years left on his deal. You're not going to have a relatively cheap core forever. At the same time, yes, they've played their best trade chips. Everyone's so fucking young. And like Donovan Mitchell's going to be 27 when next season starts. Your two of your 3 best players, Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, have not celebrated their 24th birthdays yet and won't before next season. Jared Allen is like 25, just turned 25 himself. The move, if they really wanted to make a trade, is like, can we trade Jared Allen for a wing? But as we saw, the Cavs have rebounding issues now. Mm-hmm. They're going to get worse if you all of a sudden go to pivot to 1 big minutes with Mobley. You have to figure out who's going to be the 4 next to him, blah, 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 blah. And the Jared Allen, OG Anunoby trade just no longer makes sense. I'm sorry to tell you. I didn't propose this on the pod. This is Jared Allen as like a package for Paul George. Is that enough? But I don't think the Clippers want to change up their center rotation that much. And that does nothing for you if you don't think Kawhi is going to be available.
Yeah, I think if I'm the Clippers, I don't want Allen and Zubats, so I guess I'm sending back Zubats just because I don't want to spend a bunch of resources on
to offer you. And
Yeah.
so my whole thing with the Cavs, and I think it does it to say that they weren't a letdown does a disservice to how good they were this season. And but at the same time, like, it's a why I want to spotlight Mobley shooting 20% outside the restricted area. The Knicks rebounded 38.7% of their own misses. And we'll get to the Knicks in a second for anyone who's like thumbnail stalking right now. But like, this trade for Mitchell wasn't made with just this season in mind. This team not only has time, but it also takes time to kind of balance out and figure out your roster in the aftermath of these seismic shakeups. And I would argue that the information Cleveland gleaned from this series with its current personnel, not JB Bickerstaff, becomes super valuable heading into an offseason where, again, they'll have the non-taxpayers level exception and plenty of playing time at the 3. And I don't know what Isaac Okoro plus minimal stuff can get you at this point. Like, you are not completely, I would argue the Bucks are more, admit that's not really a hot take. They just don't have as many cards to play as Cleveland does. And so I'm not as down on Cleveland's future as maybe I should be after that playoff series, just because I don't think this year was found money. I think they were better than expected. And like, it takes a little time. Like, it was one season, you played all your best trade assets on this one guy. And now you have, just because Donovan Mitchell struggled in the series against a Knicks team defense that was incredibly, like, just incredible is the word. And two, just like, now you know, hey, oh wow, our spacing is like a big deal. Like, playing with the two bigs, and when Mobley's going to be run hot and cold and doesn't really have much of a perimeter game, and we're not going to rely on his floor game as much. And by the way, the other pathway forward is like Evan Mobley just continues to figure it out on offense, like we saw for much of the regular season. And so I'm just curious as to where you landed on just the circumstances under which they exited the playoffs, because it was 5 games. You had Cavs in 6, I had Cavs in 7. So they were shockingly bad by our standards.
Yeah, no, I think the idea that, I think there's a lot of merit to the idea that the Cavs got, you win. It's a kind of an ultimate example of like, you win or you learn, that old trope, so Cavs learned a lot. I think the counter to that is they learned a few things, or they at least got confirmation of a few things that they probably should have known earlier. Like, we spent the whole year talking about the fifth starter situation, and they just don't have a small forward that ticks enough boxes. And that was maybe not even the main factor, but it was up there in the reasons that they lost. I think Jason Lloyd wrote one of my favorite kind of post-mortems that I've read in a while about the Cavs. I don't know if you saw this, but it was one of those where very clearly it was written from like an emotional place, because it seemed to me that he was not, I don't know what the emotion was, but it wasn't just, it had a little extra punch to it, because the disappointment came through, and like the frustration came through, and the sincere reaction of, this team just lost and I don't feel good about it, came through, which doesn't detract from the points he made at all, because like, argumentatively and on the merits, it was very good. But the thing I took away from that was a point he made about like, how much better off are the Cavs as a playoff team with Donovan Mitchell versus, like, over the next however many years, versus Lauri Markkanen and all those picks. Like, and I think it's hard to argue that after the season Mitchell had. They're probably, we saw this version of the Cavs pretty much with Markkanen on it, and they just weren't as good of a team 2 years ago now. But that was compelling to me, because we're talking about like, how do they address all these weaknesses? Not to mention, how do we not get crushed on the boards? Maybe put a third 7-footer out there. I don't know, that might have changed the series.
Though, that says more to me about your front court than it does about your guard. Like, it's nice when you have guards rebounding and wings rebounding, but I think
it was interesting. It made me think for a second. It made me think for a second, especially if you believe that Donovan Mitchell is going to end up in New York at his first opportunity, which I don't know if I believe.
I don't know if I believe it. He seemed genuinely ecstatic to get traded to Cleveland, and they were really good. And if you regret this trade now after watching the series, I would say that's a bigger indictment on how you feel about the Mobley Allen front court. They were just gobbled up by Mitchell Robinson.
Right. Okay. I want to get to that. So that because I wanted to finish talking about the series before we look at more Knicks or wherever you want to take it. But I think this is one of the series. So take the Bucks Heat, for example. But many of the other series, we have this tendency to focus, I think, and you tell me if you disagree on.
I disagree.
Team. I was just going to say you're really a great podcaster and a good human being. But if you don't agree with that, that's fine. It always seems to me like we fixate, like, look how much we talked about the Bucks. We fixate on like Team X lost the series versus Team Y won it. And I think it's just easier to point out like what went wrong than it is to praise what went right. Or maybe it's more interesting. I'm not sure. But in this series particularly, it seems like Team X, the reasons Team X lost are so closely related to the reasons Team Y won. And it's just the Cavs could not handle the offensive boards. They got destroyed inside. The Knicks were awesome at that. Like Mitchell Robinson put on maybe one of the best offensive rebounding performances I can remember seeing. He dominated inside. The Cavs are limited offensively. They just could not win in advantage situations when the Knicks forced the ball out of their guards' hands, and particularly Evan Mobley had to make a decision in space with a third defender crashing in off the corner shooter most of the time because the Knicks didn't care if it was Isaac Okoro or whoever. In your view, was this a did the Cavs lose this series? Did the Knicks win this series? Are those two different things? And just in general, like, what are your thoughts on like that way of thinking about a series? How we tend to focus on, Giannis was 10 and 23 from the line versus like Jimmy Butler was unstoppable and the Heat had great strategy. Like, you know what I mean? So take the Knicks Cavs thing first and then broaden it out if you want.
The Knicks won this series to me. I have never seen Tom Thibodeau adjust like this on the fly since I started watching basketball and knew that Tom Thibodeau existed.
Notoriously inflexible.
And you talk about takes that age so poorly. I still stand by what I wrote in the moment. But me calling for Tom Thibodeau to get fired, just absolutely wild. So I do think it's more of the Knicks winning this series because they exposed flaws that we kind of knew about with Cleveland, but we understand now they're going to be, because look, part of it, let's focus. The rebounding has always been weird, by the way. That's like, even during the 1 big minutes, that's something that made the Kevin Love decision curious. I think they did him a solid because he wanted to go somewhere where apparently he's going to start games. But that's something that he could have helped with, but it was also still, they weren't using him a ton and it was still an issue then there. But like, I'm using Okoro as an example. There was an expectation, and maybe we're not talking about this if Dean Wade is super healthy, but it is. I love Dean Wade, but he's Dean Wade. Like, he's Dean Wade.
And he can't be the make or break for you.
Right. And so the thought was, look, Isaac Okoro's defense, and he's hitting these threes, and we know what he can do as a cutter. Like, that's going to hold up. Why wouldn't that hold up? Look at this sample size. The playoffs are different. The spacing is different. The defenses are different. And look, I said this about Herb Jones on the Mailbag pod. Your ability if you trust him as a driver, as a cutter, that means roughly jack shit when you don't have the spacing to capitalize on it, which the Cavs just right now do not. And it makes it easier for teams to go after Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland, especially if you have non-threats elsewhere, or if there's not other guys who can make decisions and create with the ball in their hand. Like, with the way that they're set up now, is if Evan Mobley's not going to be your third advantage creator, you need a third advantage creator.
Right.
And so that's why I'm more concerned about, well, how do they, like, they could put Luke Kennard in that 3 spot if they were able to get him. That's not going to fix all of their issues either. And so I think you really need to take a look at, it's Mobley just hits, and maybe he does. Might also be unrealistic to expect him to anchor these elite rebounding units, given how much time he spends defensively away from the basket, which then that's the trickle down effect of the 2 guards you have, what's happening at the 3 spot. But I still think that, and I think this would probably be to finally get to the Knicks, like, Heat series. This series, do you disagree, was more, I don't know how you feel. It was more about the Knicks to me than it was the Cavs.
I don't know how I feel. That's why I wanted to talk about it. I think everything is so connected. I think ultimately you have to give the Knicks credit for, at the very least, capitalizing on the opposing team's weaknesses better than the reverse, because, we both picked the Cavs. So clearly we thought the Knicks had some weaknesses, and we thought one of the main ones was Julius Randle, and that just turned out to not matter almost at all. So I guess I think I probably do have to lean that the Knicks did win it, as opposed to the Cavs losing it. But like, if anything, this gives me less certainty about the next series between the Knicks and Heat than I am comfortable having, because I'm not sure if the Knicks just really exposed a team with deep, deep flaws better than other teams did, certainly during the year. But who's to say that another team, I mean, not everybody has Mitchell Robinson, but like there are scenarios where you could imagine a lot of teams just making the Cavs look this bad in a playoff series. I think we don't know. That's like you can't disprove that because we're never going to know for sure. But it makes me so much more interested in Heat Knicks because it's a different setup. It's such a different type of opponent that, I think I will feel more comfortable answering the question you asked me after Heat Knicks than I do now, because that'll give us a better indication of are the Knicks were they just like poison for the Cavs, and did they just have this series figured out, and just against the field or against a different type of team they can't do the same stuff. Though I don't know. I think that's going to be really telling going forward. But so we should talk about that series. I think Heat Knicks, like this is about just on paper really exciting. Like I don't have a dog in the fight. But I do have all the same memories everyone else does of all these, just really incredible battles over the years between these two teams. What is your initial assessment of Heat Knicks? Like, what are the pivot points? Give me like the two things that are most interesting to you, or you think are going to be most significant in the series.
I'm going to give you three because this one's a cop out. But what's the state of Julius Randle's ankle? He re-injures it, and they don't know if he's going to play yet on Sunday.
I would say to cut you off real fast. So
you're going to tell me that that's a blessing in disguise for the Knicks, aren't you?
No. I'm going to say I think Randle. We thought this incorrectly against the Cavs. I think he matters a ton against the Heat because of these tiny lineups that the Heat are going to play, where Randle is going to probably get a lot of reps against the Caleb Martins of the world, who I just don't think are big enough to stop him. So continue. Agree with you. Randle matters a ton this time.
Yes. And that's just obvious because this also could be a Randle series if the Heat are going to try and play Kevin Love a bunch. Like I know that pulls Julius Randle out, but like Kevin Love is not going to beat Julius Randle off the dribble. And so it's almost like I would rather, if I'm the Knicks and I have Julius Randle, I would rather Kevin Love be on the floor than Caleb Martin. Would you agree with that when you're looking at sort of their best lineup, or would you prefer?
Yeah, because you can quote unquote hide him on Love a little better. Just you hang out close to him and just don't worry about it. If Martin's going to be running off screens and doing some ball handling and stuff, I think that exposes Randle more defensively. Agree with that, yeah.
And this is the guiding question. I can't remember who asked it in the mailbag that I didn't get to. That's why you should join our Discord. I make Discord questions a priority. It was asked on Twitter. Want to know if the Knicks are for real? Are they title contenders? And they beat the Cavs, which I kind of in theory feel like should be a better measuring stick than the Heat. But that's also my overarching question here. One of my overarching questions is the Knicks killed it getting out in transition against the Cavs. The Heat are going to do a better job at limiting that, I would think. The Heat are also shooting. I had this number pulled up, so let me find it so that I'm exact. They have an effective field goal percentage on contested jumpers. So with a defender between 2 and 4 feet, not just tightly contested, but the semi-contested, whatever you want to call it, 65.2. They hit 54.5% of their contested threes against the Bucks. Those numbers are they were at 40.1% effective field goal rate on those same looks during the regular season. And their threes specifically, 27.4% shooting on contested threes. Are they going to stay hot from we saw them hit mid-rangers. That's like during the regular season. They were at like 47%. They're at 49% for the playoffs. That's fine. They are shooting like gangbusters from beyond the arc. The Knicks are sub 30% from beyond the arc. Volume's not too high on them anyway. Anyway, I do expect, I don't have access to this data. We should really ask our bosses to get us access to this data, by the way. I've thought about it a lot. I don't know how much, the Heat are going to play more zone than the Cavs did. I don't know if the Cavs, so the Knicks are going to have to up their 3-point volume. Does the perimeter shooting for either of these teams sort of normalize, I guess, is my bigger, because Miami was on fire. For as much as the Bucks might have done wrong, they were contesting a lot of the Heat's perimeter shots. Miami was just making them.
45% from 3 for the series for Miami. 45%.
Right. So just shooting 54% on contested threes, and the fact that Jimmy Butler's 3-point shot is only a 16-game shot. We talk about 82-game players. Jimmy Butler's 3-pointer is a 16-game shot attempt. I'm just curious as to whether any of the shooting is going to normalize for these teams. And then my final thing would be, and I know you have thoughts on Mitchell Robinson. What does sort of the lineup machinations look like in this series? They will change if Julius Randle isn't healthy, but Mitch Robinson feasted on the offensive glass against the Cavs. The Knicks had like an offensive rebounding rate of nearly 50 when he was on the floor in that series. They're like, when him and Josh Hart were on the floor, their offensive rebounding rate, the Knicks, was like 47 something. Now, the Heat could be exploited there because Bam Adebayo is not huge. And if you play Caleb Martin as your day fat, like if it's Caleb Martin, Jimmy Butler, and then flesh out Kyle Lowry, Gabe Vincent, and we should mention the other obvious, like they don't have Tyler Hero or Victor Oladipo, who in theory, as good as Miami has been, Tyler Hero specifically is important to both their half court offense and their shooting. It just didn't appear that way against Milwaukee. I think that goes without saying though, but the Knicks could really, and so I think it's the Heat. And that's my question here is who adjusts to who more? I think it's the Heat to the Knicks, to where I would almost bet that this is more of a Kevin Love series to start than I would think, because of how concerned they are about Mitchell Robinson just cleaning up the offensive glass. And if you also have to kind of juxtapose that against how good the Knicks were in transition during this series, which was a big part of it. And I know I'm throwing all these factors out. RJ Barrett, final 3 games, 65% shooting on drives. That's his decision-making there got so much better. If he's going to play like that, which is that another reason to why, if you're the Heat, like you do kind of lean on zone at points, because do you trust RJ Barrett to bust that up? I don't. In transition, like it's different, but do you trust him to bust that up in the half court? I don't know. So this series is fascinating to me. It would be my most compelling second round series if Nuggets Suns didn't exist. But like those are just, as I'm spewing thoughts here, I didn't share too much about Mitchell Robinson because I know you have like real takes about Mitchell Robinson. There's so much, but I think ultimately, to wrap this up, is I think it ends up being the Heat that adjusts more to the Knicks based not only on personnel, but what we just saw the Knicks do against the Cavaliers.
Yeah, I think, what's my overarching thought? I think
who defends Jimmy Butler? Probably a good question.
But. Right. Well, yeah, if Jimmy Butler's going to do this, it doesn't matter what anybody else does. Like, right? That's just, I mean, he's the best player in the playoffs, full stop. Devin Booker is second, I guess, so far, but there's just nobody else even remotely close to that. So that's where the analysis, the quote unquote analysis of this series starts, which is if Jimmy Butler is the best player on planet Earth, nothing else really matters even close to as much. Let's see. I'm not going to rule it out. Like, why would you rule it out? He did this against a Bucks team that in theory should have been able to stop him from doing what he did. So anyway, Butler is just too good to even discuss as a factor because it's binary. If he's great, the Heat are terrifying. If he's not, then the Heat are 44-38 and their offense sucks like it did all season. So I think it's probably the Heat that adjust. I do think I kind of trust them to make some adjustments because they showed it against the Bucks fairly often. So I'll just start with this because I had to write it down when you were talking about it because I was going to slip out of my brain. I think
I was all over the place. I would apologize, but I'm also not sorry. So
no, you're not. Well, there's a lot to talk about and unpack for this series. So I think one interesting thing to me is, can Adebayo pull Mitchell Robinson away from the basket like he did with Brook Lopez by being the primary ball handler during key stretches of the Bucks series and especially late in game 5? Because Robinson and Lopez kind of serve similar purposes. Like they're just going to deter penetration and let you shoot pull-ups or Robinson probably gets out to is capable of bothering pull-ups more than Lopez. I should have looked up the inside 10 feet shooting defensive field goals against. But so that's something to look at for me. The overarching thing that's difficult is the Knicks were an offense first team during the season and they beat the Cavs with defense and second chance points. Like that's what it was. So I don't know what this Knicks team is anymore because they've been they've succeeded in 2 totally different ways. I think so. To talk about the offensive rebounds, the Heat were 4th in opponent offensive rebound rate allowed. So the Heat controlled the defensive boards during the season way better than the Cavs did, despite being way smaller. Because on paper, it's like, well, Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, they should have a way better chance of controlling the defensive glass than the Heat do, because the Heat play Adebayo, who's undersized as a 5, and they spend a ton of time with 4 guards, and not just 4 guards, but like Vincent, Lowry, and Strus are among that group, and those guys are all basically point guard sized. Strus, I guess, is like a shooting guard size, and he plays a little bigger sometimes, but I mean, the Heat are tiny. They're a tiny team, so they'll have to play zone, which, by the way, playing zone really makes it difficult to box out. So if you're looking for a way in for the Knicks in this one, good luck with the Heat, 1, matching up size-wise, and 2, trying to keep Mitchell Robinson off the glass if you are zoned up, because has there ever been a box and 1 defense tried where the 1 is just on the other team's center face guarding him so he can't rebound? Is that what we're going to see in this series? Because it might be what you have to go to. So yeah, I don't know. I'm scattered too. I do think the Heat should hold up better on the boards. I do think the fact that they have the best player in the playoffs so far is going to force the Knicks to, figure it out defensively. I think Randall gives the Knicks an interesting edge that, they didn't need in the first round. But yeah, man, because we've been teasing it all along. Like, is Mitchell Robinson just going to win series, like not by himself, but be as big a factor as almost anybody other than Butler and Booker in these playoffs? Because his offensive rebounding was probably the main storyline of the first round series against the Cavs. And it was followed closely by the way he dominated defensively, just not allowing Mobley going downhill 4-on-3. You can't, you're not going to finish. You just aren't. So you're going to have to do the thing you're not good at, which is try to find an open teammate. Like, he was so impactful on both ends. Can he do 80% of that against the Heat? And if he can, then maybe the Knicks just win this one in 5 too. I don't know. The other thing is the shooting, the Heat's shooting. Like, they can't shoot this way. They just can't. They didn't all year. They got better, the last dozen or 20 games or whatever it was. But this offense was terrible. They damn near didn't make the playoffs at all because they turned in just an absolute dud in the first play-in game and lost because they couldn't score against a bad Atlanta defense. So, like, we may be doing a lot of hemming and hawing, and the Heat just turned back into the regular season versions of themselves, and this is not interesting. So we got a comment. What do you want? We got a few. Go ahead. I've been talking for long enough.
It's overarching. What? Arching, Dan? That there's no hard CH in there. Keep up the huggable snarls, Jens. Great works. Thank you, Jamie O'Grady. I missed the Cauldron. I wrote for the Cauldron a couple times way back when. So it's overarching. Is that what we want me to say?
I'm going to say overarching too. I don't know if that's grammatically correct, but I'll go either way on that.
The one thing I have to add about Mitchell Robinson, do you know what the Cavs shot against him at the rim in that first round series?
46.2%, Dan. Did I just stun you with a stat?
31.8%.
Damn it. I had inside 6 feet. Sorry. Even worse at the rim.
57 players are contesting at least 3 shots at the rim in the playoffs. 31.8%, not surprisingly, leads that entire field. And it's not even close for second place. Royce O'Neal's in second place, by the way, because he only played 4 games, but whatever. So he was fantastic. I do think
Hold on, Jamie, we agree. I agree. It is Ching. It's not arcing. I'm with you.
So it's overarching. That's what we're settling on.
It arches over everything, Dan. Like, everything is underneath the arch.
Overarching. I talk too fast to pronounce things correctly. So I think this is an Emmanuel Quickley series, in part because of how small the Heat skew. And I just feel like he'll bounce back, but like, if you're going to need to bust up a zone, he becomes super important to that. I'm also very curious to see, I know Grimes is dealing with the shoulder injury. If I had to bet on who spends more time on Jimmy Butler between Grimes and Hart or Barrett, I think if I had to rank it, I think it's Grimes, Barrett, Hart, because of just how good Hart does stuff for the team. And also, maybe he's not starting at that point. If it's Grimes who's starting, it might inherently limit his reps against Jimmy. I'm not sure how you feel there. And then I'm also wondering, Jimmy Butler spent this, if Kevin Love is starting, it takes the guesswork out of the equation. But if it's Caleb Martin is your primary, like, 5th or whatever, Butler spent almost an even amount of time on Jalen Brunson, and Julius Randle during the regular season. I'm just wondering if you can ask him. My overarching inquiry here, can you ask Jimmy Butler to do that in the postseason when he's doing this? And look, we know Gabe Vincent's going to get Gabe Vincent shots up at this point. Like, unless Kyle Lowry has the pull up going, or you're going to have, and we saw Bam run some point guard against the Bucks late in games. You're going to maybe need to lean on that a little bit more heavily if you need Jimmy, because Jalen Brunson's legit in the sense that I thought there were some times he deviated from his usual script against Cleveland and was kind of like, I don't faux aggressive, whereas like he just wasn't capitalizing on the attention that the Cavs were throwing his way. But 9.8 times out of 10, he's going to do that. And so like you almost, if you throw Butler on him, it's a solution where, okay, well, we don't have to trap or blitz him as much, but then it's, oh, fuck. Like now we're reliant on everyone else to make decisions. And Jimmy Butler is going to be, I know it's Jimmy Butler, but like the guy has an endurance tank. And I can't imagine it's just always full. Maybe I'm wrong, but those are my last overarching thoughts on this series.
I wonder if the Heat will double Brunson a little more and just see if the other Knicks players can facilitate. I wonder if that's an adjustment. I wonder if the Heat will play, or if the Knicks on the other side will play some zone or some weird box and one stuff on Butler and just hope somebody else can try to score.
Can you play zone against this version of Miami's offense?
I don't know. I don't know what the version is. Is it going to be the team that shoots? Because you can't do it if they're going to shoot 45% from three. That's for damn sure. Yeah, I don't know. I think the Butler. Well, you would agree that I'm pinging all over the place, but
that's this series. There's like no central focus. It's just pinball.
Talking about the Brunson matchup, you would agree that you sort of have to put size on Brunson, right? Otherwise, his mid-post game is it's too difficult to stop. Like you have to put a bigger guy if you're going to single cover him. So the problem with the Heat is they like Jimmy Butler is the bigger guy, because otherwise it's maybe Lowry is sturdy enough to just knock him off his spots, but that feels like a big ask. So I like, you can't put Gabe Vincent on Brunson. So you either got, I think if I'm trying to draw up a way for the Heat to succeed defensively, which I don't even know if that's the most important like side of the floor for the series, you got to either get the ball out of Brunson's hands and make other Knicks try to chew moving the ball or finding shooters or attacking, or you just have to put Jimmy Butler on Brunson, because I think he's going to eat up whatever smaller guys you try to put on him if he gets into that mid post and low post area. Because he's already so good at scoring against guys that are his size or a little bigger. If you put, if it's Strus, if it's Vincent, if Hero's not in this series, but if you'd had Hero switched onto him, that would have just been a feast of like pivots and, fade away right shoulder stuff, or left shoulder stuff, I guess, for him. So yeah, maybe Butler has to. And you know what? I bet he wants to. I bet Butler is relishing the idea of just playing 45 minutes and having to do everything on both ends.
Oh, wow. Is he on a minutes restriction?
Yeah.
If I were the Heat, so this is probably the wrong decision, I actually would not have Butler on Brunson. I would skew towards the Caleb Martin lineups or try it with Kyle Lowry. I would send help, and then I would I would task Jimmy Butler with, can he take away their second best decision maker, whether it's Julius Randle or RJ Barrett? And then does that help you pitch in on the offensive, on the defensive glass? So let's have him, because he's so strong, has some size, to help gang rebound against Mitchell Robinson. That's how I would at least start it. I think that probably means that I'm wrong, because I'm the one who thinks that, but that's just, I'm so fascinated with this series. What's your prediction?
Oh, geez, I wasn't ready for this. I'm going to go.
Do you want me to get mine first?
Give yours first, because I was going to answer with my heart, but I want to think about it a little more.
I'm not sure. This is probably mostly my heart speaking. I'm going to go Knicks in 5. No, I'm just Knicks in 7. I think they have more cards to play on the offensive end of the floor, ultimately, as on fire as the Heat have been. And again, the fact that Duncan Robinson contributed last series, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, it matters, but it's just, I trust the Knicks, even if they have to skew smaller, even if Julius Randle's going to miss. That's the big one. If you tell me that Julius Randle's at 60% or going to miss a couple games, it changes the complexion of this series for me, because I ultimately don't trust RJ Barrett to be your second best on ball decision maker. I just don't. And that would make it an Emmanuel Quickley series even more than I think it already is. But given the current state of affairs, I'm going Knicks in 7.
I'm going to go Heat in 7, because I can't leave that last series and just decide that Jimmy Butler is going to be denied. I just can't. I can't do it. And we talked about all the different nuances and angles, but at the end of it, I don't know what the fix is from the Knicks perspective for Butler. And maybe it's just Mitchell Robinson making sure they get 2 shots for every one that the Heat do, which is a real thing. And if that happens again, then man, are we going to have to reevaluate our perception of what like a paint bound center is worth going forward. But I hope to God we get 7 games either way. But I can't get the Heat out of my mind. Like, well, let me ask you real quick. The Heat faced a better team in the first round, right? Like that's not a controversial stance, even with Giannis missing time.
Yes.
So
yeah, they did.
That's a factor for me too.
Yeah, but look at what they shot. Like
I know. If they come out and they average 96 points a game and shoot 32% from 3, this will just be over in a hurry.
From the Knicks perspective, though, for a team that didn't really look to get out and run during the regular season, I think it was like 14.5% of their possessions were in transition. They ratcheted that up to almost 19% against the Cavs. That's going to be a big factor, is who can change the pace of play a little bit. I think the Knicks' ability to vary up the cadence last series, and the Heat played a different cadence than half court and in transition than Cleveland did. But that's going to be this. Why did I not call this my most fascinating series? But it's Knicks in 7. Do you want to go Celtics Sixers? You want to talk about Celtics Sixers?
Yeah, we could do that a little bit. Do you think we learned anything about the Sixers in the first round other than Joel Embiid can't stay healthy?
My whole thing is, this is a series where I think you read it. I saw people like bringing up the playoff track record between the Celtics over the last 3 years. I don't care what it was when Ben Simmons was. I'm sorry, I can't bring myself to care what it was when Ben Simmons was on the team. I do think it's fair to look at the right series. I understand. That's all that matters. Joel Embiid's health is just the biggest overarching question in this. Well, also James Harden's health. He's dealing with Achilles stuff. And if he's going to shoot poorly from 2 or not get to the foul line, that warps what Philly's going to do. I'm aside from that. And there's nothing to add to the Joel Embiid injury. They don't know if he's going to be ready. I would hazard that they try and play him. But if he's going to be not even close to 90% or whatever it is, it's just Philly's fucked. Like they're fucked.
Right. Yeah. I think my takeaway from the first round is I didn't really learn anything about the Sixers because the Nets played a really weird, and I think the correct defense against him, which is just 2 guys on him all the time, get it out of his hands. And Tyrese Maxey, if you're going to make half your threes in the series, which he did, the Sixers are going to win. So the Celtics won't be quite as, won't have to sell out quite as ridiculously to handle Embiid, although you're going to just devote all your attention to him anyway. The strategy won't change that much. It just won't be quite as extreme. But I also don't think we learned a lot about Boston, because the good version of them, got up 2-0, and then the bad version of them, the offense stagnated, and you let a not very good Hawks team turn it into a series. Sort of. I don't think anyone really believed the Hawks were going to win that series, but
I was rooting so hard for Game 7. You have no idea.
Well, I love chaos. And that was on the table. I mean, it was a tie game until Jaylen Brown hit. The Celtics hit 3 threes in a row very late in that game last night to, put it away. So it was in doubt for 46 minutes or whatever it was of Game 6. So, and so having not learned anything about either of these teams, I go back to like what I would have thought at the outset of the playoffs, which is that Boston is just a little bit better. It can play different ways. It's not as, the Embiid thing, we can't just not act like it's, it's the biggest angle of maybe any second round playoff series, is just how healthy is he and can he be dominant? And if healthy, can he finally put together like a really great playoff series against a great team in, beyond the first round? Like that, we haven't really seen that, or certainly we've never seen him string together multiples of those. So I go Celtics just because I think they were the better team during the year. They actually have shown us they can make a finals. They can play a lot more different styles. They're deeper. Their personnel allows them to adjust, after, plan A doesn't work in game 1, hypothetically. Whereas the Sixers kind of just, it's Embiid. And then depending on what the Celtics do to defend him, either he goes for huge numbers or you're relying on James Harden to create shots for himself, which he's not great at anymore, or someone like Maxey to take over and be clearly the team's second best player. I don't know if I believe that can happen again. So I'm not sure I'm ready to make a pick yet, unless you have one in hand, but I feel better about the Celtics, just even independent of the Embiid injury, which changes everything. I feel better about Boston.
The two, if we learned anything about the Sixers or Embiid, it was more of a reinforcement that he is just not the same player if you're going to double him. He will make better. Even there are games where he was kind of limited on a shot opportunity. He was just making the right reads. And if you trust your teammates to make shots out of that, that's huge. And so that does bode well for the Sixers if he's relatively healthy. What I find fascinating is we didn't see it enough in the regular season because RW3 was hurt. But like some of the smaller lineups for Boston gave Philly a lot of trouble. Their current starting lineup played twice against the Sixers and had like a plus 37.5 net rating. I think the natural inclination, if everyone's healthy, is no, you give Horford the Embiid assignment and you have RW3 on the court to like muck up everything else around the basket and pitch in there. I'm just curious as to whether they go that route because of one, just how fucking good Derek White is at this point. And maybe at that point you're pulling Marcus Smart, but I do think you might need him. He's better at navigating tighter spaces within the pick and roll on ball. I'm just curious to see if there's like a tug of war there. I also want to see, like, I feel like Tyrese Maxey, you mentioned if he's hitting his threes, like they might need him to create stuff because of just Boston's defensive solutions where it's they'll throw bodies or a body at Embiid and then they still have Marcus Smart or Derek White or Jaylen Brown to go after James Harden. And then if he's on Harden, Maxey's going to match up with Derek White or Smart. Would probably be like this. Is Jaylen Brown going to get that aside? I would think it's Smart, or if they stick with their current starting lineup, it would be Smart or Derek White's going to line up against him most of the time. And so then all of a sudden, does that trickle down like, oh shit, like we need Tobias Harris to do things offensively here? I think the Sixers, if Embiid's healthy, are going to have to shorten their rotation even more because Niang can't play against this team. I just don't think he can. And Brian Toporek wrote about this for Forbes, did a great job of breaking down the whole series, but that was like one of the bigger pivot points too. So those are just kind of my stray thoughts. And I do wonder how the Sixers are going to then in turn match up with Boston offensively. I don't think, Philly's going to play drop because it's Embiid. And I don't, is that the worst thing in the world given Boston is, for the most part, accurate on its jumpers, but there's variability in whether do you bet on surviving the waves or do you try and be more aggressive? Let's bring Embiid up more and try and disrupt more consistently. I might actually prefer the former, which is, I think, weird and maybe inaccurate because I skew towards being more aggressive in these situations and I'm just arguing in favor of conservatism. I think I'm wondering if I'm being influenced by, I don't know what Joel Embiid's knee is like right now. It's like, I don't want to task him with having to be more aggressive and coming up high and switching and all that.
Is there a better person for Robert Williams to hang out on and destroy the Sixers offense than PJ Tucker? Like Tucker's 3 for 15 against the Nets from deep, has not, is someone that I think if you're the Celtics, you say, PJ Tucker, if you would like to if you want to do the Grant Williams thing and shoot 17 threes in a game, like he did in the last postseason, I forget which game that was, have at it. You can shoot as many open threes as you want. The other thing is Williams, it's not like PJ Tucker is just like cemented in the corners. So Williams is, and if he's moving anywhere, he's not moving fast. So Williams as the rover could just not have a more choice matchup, I think, because even if he overextends or he's too aggressive coming in to clean up messes, like who cares? The Celtics would love for Tucker to for his usage rate to be above like one of the lowest usage players of all time. You would love it for him to, get up to like 15% usage, even just like take as many shots as you want, because that means Embiid's not taking shots. It means nobody's drawing fouls. It means the Sixers are doing maybe the last thing they want to do on an offensive possession. So I think but you know what? We talk about Embiid's health being a factor. Are we ever sure Robert Williams is going to be healthy for multiple games in a row? Like that's
I don't know which game it was, but the Celtics brought in Blake Griffin and the game wasn't decided. And I was like, is RW3 okay? And he ended up playing after that, but I was just like,
It's always your first thought. I think it's you talking about the Embiid injury specifically with respect to he's just, he's not going to be up to the level of any screens. And that's going to it's going to make the Celtics into are you making your threes or not? Or are you making your pull-up jumpers or not offense? I think at least that means the Celtics will get a clean look more often than not if they just, attack, pull up behind the arc or take, step in and take jumpers. Whereas I think it's going to be easier for the Celtics to make it so the Sixers if they get clean looks, it'll be by guys they probably would prefer not be shooting them, or it wouldn't be their first, second, third choice. So yeah. You want to predict this one? You got any more on?
I feel like we saw so much of them during the regular season that is very clear, or that we understand how they're going to play each other. My biggest question is just sort of like, what lineups does Boston skew towards in this one? And then there's the injuries make this. I just very quickly more concerned about Joel Embiid's knee or the James Harden experience right now.
I mean, I think if you get to a point in this series where it really matters whether James Harden is going to choke or not, the Sixers have sort of already lost, because that means that Embiid. So I'm way more concerned about Embiid's knee. That's priority one for sure. I
want to go Celtics in 5. I'm going to give the Sixers 2. Joel Embiid's knee is just making me wildly uneasy at this point. And I think the Celtics kind of understand. I mean, I guess I say they understand, but they fucked around in game 6 after fucking around in game 5 against the Hawks. And that's also why I'm going to give the Sixers another 2 games, but they're the deeper team. They do have more optionality on the roster. And I ultimately don't think, even if Embiid is cooking, and look, he scored, didn't he drop 52 against his team or whatever? Mm-hmm. Even if he's destroying them, they have so many answers for everybody else on Philly's roster that even if James Harden's playing well, it's just, they can handle it. And so I'm going Celtics in 6. I hope this series goes 7 though, because fans like in the buildings really seem to get up for this matchup. And I could just, the trash talking element here between Smart and Embiid could just be generational. And so I'm rooting for 7 games.
I'm going to go Celtics in 6 also. There is a chance that this is 4 or 5 though, just if Embiid isn't like an MVP caliber guy, because I don't think the Sixers have enough sort of good fallback options that you can count on winning you more than a game. So not controversial. If the best player on the lower seed is not healthy, the higher seed's going to win pretty easily.
Suns versus Nuggets, or Nuggets versus Suns, 1v4. Mr. Grant Hughes, what is your biggest overarching question for this series?
I think it's got to be, because it was one of the most important, unknowns of the whole playoffs is how's Denver going to defend? Is this a series that is going to challenge the Nuggets and Jokic in space? Does it matter that the Suns don't even really care about getting to the rim unless they absolutely need to, because they'll just pull up and make, 3 out of 4 mid-range shots? I guess you could argue that the way the Suns like to play offense makes it less likely that the Nuggets issues are going to be exposed defensively. But yeah, that's the first factor, is just what does Denver's coverage initially look like against, ball screens up top involving Jokic? Do the Suns, if it's Chris Paul, for example, and Ayton, like, is Chris Paul going to be able, what kind of shots does Chris Paul want to get out of those sets? And what kinds of shots are the Nuggets willing to concede? That's where the series starts for me. And then everything kind of spirals outward from there. Do you have something different than Nuggets defense?
Yeah, my actual biggest question was the Suns defense. They just literally let the Clippers cook when the Clippers didn't have their 2 best players for most of the series. And so there's some concerns level there. And their rotation is it's not shallow, because I really like Biyombo, and I feel like this is more of a Josh Okogie series when you're looking at trying to defend Jamal Murray, versus Craig might be better if you have the bigger wing creators like the Clippers had at one point in that series. But let's talk about the Nuggets defense, because I think that's probably that's going to be, I'm assuming it's the more widely talked about aspect. I can't bring myself, and I was listening to the Dunker Spot talk about the Nuggets defending the Suns. I'm starting to think, just because Nikias and Steve Jones are so much smarter than I am, have a great pulse on just like what teams would be concerned about. I guess I'm under concerned about the Chris Paul matchup, because I feel like Jamal Murray can absolutely handle him at this point. And that's not actually an indictment on Chris Paul so much as there are just pockets of possessions where Jamal Murray is so tough to do things with, to move, like displace when he's on defense. And I'm also wondering, you mentioned the rim pressure from the Suns. In theory, like if you're going to play more conservative with Jokic, the Suns are built to carve you up, because they're just going to absolutely destroy you from mid-range. I'm wondering, I look at the Timberwolves series, and on the one hand, I'm like, there were times where Jokic just was like so far away from Rudy Gobert, and you're trusting your back line defense, that you're not going to have that luxury against the Suns. And then I'm kind of like, well, why not?
Right.
Because DeAndre Ayton will bail out a lot of the times if he catches the ball. If he's hitting his mid-range or getting all the way to the basket, then you sort of get yourself concerned with, okay, well, now we have to, like, what do we do? Are we like, what? Like, I think it gets harder if DeAndre Ayton's giving you actual rim pressure or, again, knocking down his jumpers. But the other thing I'm wondering, and I know they're not going to do this. I know they're not going to, because Aaron Gordon's already talking about defending Kevin Durant. What if you just said, hey, we're going to throw Michael Porter Jr. on Kevin Durant so that Aaron Gordon can still be that form of backline help? Because we have KCP on Devin Booker. You're not going to throw Gordon on Booker. Like, is that, and then we're going to play Jokic super aggressively. And maybe that's our counter to, you have this 7-footer who can run pick and rolls in Kevin Durant. I'm just wondering if that's something they could try. I don't think it's necessary, but like, could we see them get super? And look, Zach Lowe has wrote about all the different things the Nuggets have tried. Ben Taylor was first on it for Thinking Basketball, had a great YouTube video on their peel switching tactics. I actually think that Denver, and this is not to say that they're just going to run away with this series, I actually think that Denver's better built to defend this team right now than people are crediting them. And a lot of that to me has to do with, Jamal Murray had more of an up and down series, I think, against the Timberwolves than a lot of his stats suggest. He had some very just hot stretches shooting that propped up some of his numbers. But I have more confidence in him defensively. Just like I have more confidence in Devin Booker turning in like defensive player of the year shit against the Clippers in game 1. But I think they're better built to guard the Suns than we're crediting. And that's, a lot of it has to do with Jamal Murray, but I think all more of it has to do with, well, if you play ultra aggressive, I trust that Michael Porter Jr., or if you go to the Bruce Brown, amalgam of, okay, we're pulling Michael Porter Jr. for Bruce Brown, I trust that there's going to be enough answers to what Phoenix is doing, unless they're getting to the basket more, or DeAndre Ayton is one getting to the basket more, to hitting his jumpers or his turnarounds when there's like no one in front of him. So that's, maybe I'm not giving DeAndre Ayton enough credit. Maybe I'm somehow not giving Chris Paul enough credit, because you just have 3 guys on this roster who in theory are built to carve up the most popular defensive coverage that you may see during this series.
Is it as simple as Denver might be able to slow down the Suns, but the Suns cannot stop the Nuggets? Like, that's kind of where that's where I was going with, how do the Suns defend the Nuggets? I think it's, you could say, we know Ayton, you're not going to throw doubles at Jokic because of what he will do to you with those doubles. You can't.
And I think and maybe I didn't see enough of the tail end of the Phoenix Clippers series, which was not the one that I kind of neglected, but it was just without Kawhi and Paul George, it was just not compelling to me.
You're not going to get any good information there.
The Nuggets have just way more off-ball movement than most of the Clippers offensive sets. And even with Russ playing without Kawhi and Paul George, I would argue that's still the case there. It gets a lot harder. And when you're talking about DeAndre Ayton becomes ultra important because he's going to be going up against Jokic one-on-one most of the time. But filling out that 5th wheel spot is really hard to me, because that's the player in theory who you're going to, unless you think Devin Booker can go against Jamal Murray, which, hey, I won't rule it out. If you play Josh Okogie to say we need him to go after Jamal Murray, I think that makes sense. What if he's not hitting enough threes at the other end? That's also we talk about Denver's defense, that's giving them a point of flexibility. To where, like, if Josh Okogie's there, I might be like, hey, you know what, Michael Porter Jr., you go defend Kevin Durant, Aaron Gordon, you're on that, and you just try and, swivel. Be behind Jokic, send help or blitzes where you need to. That's something they could look at. But there's also, we've seen stretches where Okogie has hit some of his threes, but if you think you can't play him on offense, that increases the importance of Torrey Craig, which I do then believe makes it harder to defend Jamal Murray with. I think like Okogie is just a better answer there. And so I'm very fascinated to see. And also, we talk about the Suns have a 7-footer who's an all-time great, can get a shot off over everybody. Michael Porter Jr. can do the same thing, not off the dribble the way that Kevin Durant can, but like, you're not going to be like, you could maybe cheat off him if you're trying to, depending on who you want to stash there. But like, he's not, you don't look at Mike, the person you're going to like, it's Aaron Gordon, who's just been rough on offense for a while now. Had a hell of a defensive series, I think, against the Timberwolves for the most part. I think you phrased it best, but as I'm rambling here, is that the Nuggets, to me, have a better chance of disrupting the Suns' offense than the Suns do. No one's going to, first of all, these games are going to be like, I'm smashing the over on game one if I'm a bettor, because I think that it's going to undersell what I think it was at 225 when I looked. These games are going to be in like the 240s, I think.
So, I mean, I phrased it as a question because I'm not sure. I think it's, so the problem with the problem with the idea of the Suns can't stop Denver and the Nuggets maybe can slow down the Suns, and therefore this is a Nuggets series. The problem is, I think the Suns basically play a style and have the personnel that sometimes the defense doesn't matter. Like Durant is just the quintessential example of that, where you can cover him perfectly and he's just going to make 8 out of 10, contested jumpers on some nights. And you just, that's what decides the game. So in some sense, the Suns have the ability to sort of be immune to defense. But at the same time, there will be nights where they just don't make every mid-range shot. And the Nuggets, again, I don't think are going to be stoppable defensively. So the Okogie thing, I agree. He sort of has to be involved. And we never care about depth in the playoffs, but like, you got to have a fifth guy. The Cavs series proved that, and
I would think you have to have a sixth too, right? Like
sure, you got to have a fifth. Like, you really gotta have a fifth, because so it's not going to be that different than the Okoro treatment, or go back to the Tony Allen treatment or whatever, or how I was just talking about how the Celtics will happily let PJ Tucker shoot. I think at least in game one, if Okogie is in the game, he's not going to be defended. So unless he's going to go Gary Payton II and just perfectly time every baseline cut, to catch lobs and dunk them, Okogie might just be someone that you really can't have him out there in what is probably going to be a shootout, because he's a great defensive player and he hustles and he plays really hard. But like, if you're right, and I think you are, that it's just going to be who outscores the other team. Like, Okogie's not helpful in that effort, outscoring people, especially, if one of his jobs is going to be to maybe, I don't know, double Jokic. We don't want to see that, but like, he's not shutting down. I don't know. So yeah, I'm also talking in circles because we're just, dealing in hypotheticals here, and we're trying to forecast a series that is,
because the Suns are still so foreign.
Right. We don't know anything about the Suns. Like, if we learned
relative to going up against the Nuggets specifically too. It's just like, we have more information on the Suns after watching the Clippers series, but like, it's just Kevin Durant wasn't there.
Well, and even if we had seen Kawhi and Paul George in the first round, who cares what we would have learned there, because the Nuggets don't have that guy. They're totally differently constructed. The defensive challenges they present are completely different than the Clippers hypothetically would have if Kawhi had stayed healthy all series, or Paul George had been involved. So yeah, I keep coming back to the original question, like of one can maybe stop the other, and this being the Nuggets and the Suns, I don't think are going to stop. Like, what does it look like? What does a successful defensive Suns series look like? Like, Jokic just isn't willing to try to go for 50 in single coverage. Like, that he just won't do it.
If you rewind, and he could do this, he's so much better than he was 2 and 3 years ago, which is it's just like, and I think it looks successful if you've rattled Jamal Murray and or Michael Porter Jr. You've killed the non-Jokic minutes where you have Murray and Porter Jr. staggering from him. That's probably what it looks like most successfully. And you could throw this at, like, what does a successful defensive performance look like for the Nuggets? I've even entertained, and maybe it's because I know Gordon will spend so much time on Durant, but just watching Devin Booker, I'm more concerned about the Nuggets matching up with Devin Booker than I am about Durant, in part because we know Gordon's going to go on Durant. But I've also thought, like, if you don't trust KCP or Bruce Brown to handle that, like, why not just try? And there are going to be possessions where Kevin Durant, I'm still not used to it. He's just in the corners. And I'm imagining they won't let this happen if this ends up being the case. But like, then just have Michael Porter Jr. there. And maybe does Aaron Gordon need to take on Devin Booker? Is he your best option there? Because Devin Booker is a better passer than Kevin Durant. I hope that's not a hot take for him. He's a better passer than Kevin Durant, smarter passer than Kevin Durant. And he's just better. He's not better. He's also more familiar with this team. When you're looking at when they're not involved in the primary actions, whether they're not a screener or if they're not the ball handler, he's inherently more dangerous than Kevin Durant because of the way that he's able to move, or maybe he'll be more likely to go get the ball. And that could end up really hurting, I mean, every team, but the Nuggets specifically there, though. And so I find myself, I don't know how much I'm influenced by the fact that we know Aaron Gordon is the quote unquote Kevin Durant answer for Denver. I am so much more concerned about how Denver guards Devin Booker. I've actually wondered, is this a Christian Brown series in the sense that Bruce Brown is 6'4", KCP 6'5", 6'4", just throw the 6'7" guy who can move on Devin Booker. He's a rookie and he might get absolutely roasted. But is that something they look at?
I think if you're the Nuggets and you come into this series doing anything but making Devin Booker like your first, like we got to deal with that guy first priority, you're making a mistake. And then you're necessarily diverting resources from Kevin Durant. And that feels real scary to me. Like there is a version of this series where we emerge from it, the Suns have won, and we look at each other and say, well, shit, Kevin Durant still is the best player on planet Earth. Because he just, the Nuggets couldn't afford to give him the attention that you would normally give a Kevin Durant. And he, shoots 65% in a 5-game series win. And because like you have to put Devin Booker at the top of the scouting report because he's, other than Jimmy Butler, he's been the best player in the postseason, I think, and just has shown a total offensive package.
Mitchell Robinson.
Besides Mitchell Robinson, right? Yeah. Mitchell Robinson's like, we don't even, it's like how we always say this guy's the best at X other than Steph. This guy's the best at X other than Mitchell Robinson. That is a scenario that feels real to me where Kevin Durant just wins this series. But I do like the idea that you've mentioned of just we're not going to stop him. So let's put MPJ on him and just use our defense elsewhere to hope that Devin Booker doesn't carve us up and we can handle the Ayton Paul pick and roll with 4 quality defenders, and MPJ just hang out over there and hope the Suns don't remember that Kevin Durant can come like get handoffs and move off the ball. That's one way to combat that.
We've somehow talked about all of this before we end immersions, and I still think that DeAndre Ayton might be the player that defines the offensive series for Phoenix because of what it would mean for how Denver needs to defend.
That's a huge problem for the Suns. If DeAndre Ayton matters that much, I'll taking the Nuggets in a short series.
If Ayton's not like gonna get to the basket with or without the ball, shouldn't it make it a lot easier and more efficient and effective to play Jokic up? Is not, to actually blitz, because the Suns will figure, like they'll have Kevin Durant coming in from the corner, Devin Booker coming in from the corner, or whatever. I've also thought about will the Nuggets help wildly off of Chris Paul when he's not running pick and rolls, because I think he's more willing to catch and shoot threes, but that's just never been his.
He doesn't want to.
Yeah, he does. He still doesn't. I think he's way more willing to. There are so many questions, but I think it's Ayton, because if he's not, then it changes how the Suns. I don't know the data on how many Kevin Durant, Devin Booker pick and rolls are run, but you might need to run more of those. In which case, well, then what are you doing with DeAndre Ayton at the floor? Him hanging out the dunker spot, I would argue, makes life a lot easier on the Nuggets. And I don't want to compare him to Rudy Gobert's limitations on offense, because the Wolves ended up shooting 57.5% against Jokic at the rim, which is a big deal because it was just basically he wasn't concerned about it and the way that they were able to defend. And he was allowing 70% shooting at the rim during the regular season. I don't think Ayton is that type of restricted on offense, but he can bottle himself up by taking the wrong shots or bailing out.
Refusing to dunk ever.
And that's almost my flash bulb factor of how the rest of the series is going to go. And it might actually then fluctuate by game, because that's what DeAndre Ayton does at this point.
Do you want to make a pick here? I feel like I know what you have to pick.
I know what I have to pick, but I'm going to pick Nuggets in 6. This is not an indictment on the Suns. It's like I said, they've been really good, and I don't even think they've come close to reaching their peak, because there's still some offensive awkwardness. Their defense against the Nuggets actively concerns me. And I think that Denver is eventually just going to have more offensive counters to where would you agree that Phoenix might have the higher defensive ceiling? But I think that the Nuggets are going to have more answers to the Suns' peak defense than Phoenix might have to Denver's peak defense. And part of me thinks that may be irrational because the Suns' answers are just, well, Devin Booker and Kevin Durant exist. But because of the variety of ways in which Denver's offense can, I don't want to use the word mutilate, but like that's way too strong, but go at you. I have to pick Nuggets in at least 7 because they're my title pick. And you got to roll with it if they're still alive at this point.
I don't subscribe to that theory. I'm a habitual flip-flopper, and I also didn't pick the Nuggets to win the whole thing. So I have some flexibility here. I'm torn. I think on the one hand, the Suns have 2 players that I trust in Booker and Durant in a playoff series. I think there's a great chance those are the 2 best playoff players involved in this matchup. I can also see the possibility of like Jokic we can be done with this whole, he can't hold up in the playoffs. I want that narrative to be over. I want the Nuggets
legacy series.
It's a legacy defining series. We need like a blinking, we need like the challenge light to come on for a legacy defining moment. I'm going to go Denver in 7. And it's mainly because I don't believe Chris Paul and DeAndre Ayton can do enough to supplement what I think Booker and Durant will do, which will be to just be phenomenal offensively. I don't feel comfortable with that at all. Like this feels like a total coin flip to me.
And I want to make it clear, if I really believed that the Suns would win, and I would pick the Suns over the Nuggets. It's not me just being completely stubborn. It's just I feel uneasy about them, and maybe I shouldn't, just because it's been like, oh, we've seen sub 15 games of Kevin Durant with this full group, and it's like, that's part of the problem, but it's also part of the solution.
Right. We just don't know anything about the Suns. The first round didn't teach us anything. We don't have enough of a sample from the regular season. There's too many unknowns. Like, how about this? I would say the Suns' ceiling is higher, because if everything clicks, then they're unguardable, and they do, I agree, have more sort of a better setup to defend different teams across different series than the Nuggets do. But we just don't know if they can reach that ceiling. So
this is the longest pod we've recorded in quite some time. I didn't envision us going almost $1:45. Do you have anything to add, or are you ready to take us out of here?
I'm sure I could add lots of things, but I can't think of anything coherent to say.
Detroit Pistons offseason outlook. You want to go there?
You want to just start that right now? What kind of packages can they get for Bogdanović? Is he on the table? No. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for your questions. Thank you for correcting us on the pronunciation of overarching. I wish, you know what? I'm sure there are things that I get wrong every time and no one tells me. So one thing we look forward to is grammatical corrections.
You have that air about you that you're always right, so people are more likely to critique me.
I'm irrational confidence. Let's see. Speaking of which, go Warriors tonight. Whenever you listen to this, I hope they close it out. Not just because I want more series to be over, but because I am an unabashed Warriors fan.
With all objectivity at the end.
I don't care, man. If you don't know by now that I'm not objective about the Warriors.
It was just funny. All the analysis we just provided, and you're anything but go Warriors.
Yeah. Shut that beam down. I don't want to see that beam anymore. Get it out of here. So thanks for listening. Rate, review, subscribe. Tell your friends. Tell your enemies. We close, as always, with a shout out to the one and only Frank Ntilikina and an amended apology. Jared Allen no longer gets apologies. The apology now goes to the one and only game-wrecking Mitchell Robinson.